after finishing The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Cody Lee, owner of BlackCatBooks.org and author of the upcoming American Evil, the sequel to Cruel and Beautiful, which I just realized a little while ago, have been playing a lot of Breath of the Wild. I have gone back to this game after finishing the Tears of the Kingdom because I knew there would be a bunch of people coming out either saying that Breath of the Wild is better and that Tears of the Kingdom does not need to exist, or alternatively, that Tears of the Kingdom is so good that it invalidates Breath of the Wild's existence. So because Tears of the Kingdom exists, no one's want to go back to play Breath of the Wild. Like, it is incredible, like the narratives we've seen people like try to reach to justify like the anger and outrage at like modern Zelda. You know, the games of the year of 2017 and 2023. Like there is no rhyme or reason behind it. There is no like actual logic. People aren't passionate about this. They're not really thinking critically. What they're doing is simply just throwing everything at the wall trying to get something to stick. Ideally, like nobody would be talking about Zelda. You know, everybody would hate every Zelda game, right? In these people's minds, that is like the ideal. Everyone would just accept that like Baldur's Gate 3 is the game of the year. like ideally that is the situation in which nobody would be talking about Zelda at all. But because it is the game of the year 2023, because this is a big thing, right? A big deal that's hugely popular, has sold a bunch of units, has really high Metacritic scores. Like the industry is trying everything it possibly can to downplay these games, and it's resulted in this weird situation in which both Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild are like compared negatively to each other, right? Like these people are trying to do something, find something they can use to justify like why you should play one game over the other instead of just acknowledging that both games are the best games of their respective genres, right? Like that they are like in that they have the culmination of everything Zelda has been up to this point. You know, I just got told today that like, oh, Zelda used to be good back in the N64 days, back with Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, but you know, I'm thinking back to like when I was growing up in 2006, you know, like people were telling me that Zelda used to be good with like A Link to the Past and like the original Zeldas, right? Like this is what they always pull is that they always tell you that the old games were way better in an attempt to desperately downplay the new ones in order to push like nonsense like Baldur's Gate 3, Diablo 4, Street Fighter 6, Final Fantasy 16, Resident Evil 4 remake, or like, you know, Hi-Fi Rush, right? Like these are the people who are just doing everything they possibly can to downplay Zelda. But I can tell you, you know, having played Breath of the Wild, I'm on like the Rito dungeon now. I'm blowing through it actually. When you know what you're doing, the game becomes like really straightforward. It's pretty cool seeing like how your knowledge of like where everything is kind of translates to a new playthrough. But like yeah, I am like blowing through Breath of the Wild, and it is shocking how much different it is than Tears of the Kingdom. And a fact that I think that a lot of people haven't truly grasped yet, because a lot of people really got stuck on the meme that like, oh, the world map is the same, so that means it's the same game, when that really isn't true at all. Like, you know, the general structure is different. You know, climate is different. You know, structures exist in Tears of the Kingdom that did not exist in Breath of the Wild. You know, Breath of the Wild has this like lonely, isolated feel to it. Like shrines are different in these games. You know, like combat is different. Like acquiring weapons is different. Like Tears of the Kingdom has the vehicle infusion system. You know, like you have different means of like transportation. Like, you know, Breath of the Wild has like the champion system. Like you have like the regenerative you know, Mifa thing. You have Rivali's Gale. There's nothing really like that in Tears of the Kingdom. In Tears of the Kingdom, you had to like be a to get around in a different way, right? Like they did something really spectacular with Tears of the Kingdom, in which they really rethought the wheel of like how they designed Breath of the Wild and came up with something like really distinct, unique, and different from Breath of the Wild. And what's weird is that nobody really wants to admit it. We're still in this phase where people don't really want to admit that like how different Tears of the Kingdom is. Like I just got to the first the Rito dungeon in Breath of the Wild, as I just mentioned, and I was like shocked when I realized that like holy crap, like the Divine Beast dungeons in Breath of the Wild are completely different than the ones we got in Tears of the Kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom are like more in line with like traditional Zelda dungeons with like the puzzles and like going around and stuff like that. It's still like a stripped down version of it, but like it's still like more in line with traditional Zelda dungeons. Here you're like in Breath of the Wild, you're exploring these giant robots that can move around with like the map system. Like it's a little bit different than what we see in other Zelda games. And more specifically, it's better than it's different than what we get in Tears of the Kingdom. I hesitate to say better, but like the fact that like they're so distinct from each other in this like very blatant way is really telling, I think, as like the current state of the Zelda franchise and just how difficult it's becoming to downplay it. Because if anyone seriously says that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are indistinguishable from each other, or that they're the same game, that just proves that they haven't really spent any significant time with them at all. Like it's remarkable how I have spent like 70 hours into Tears of the Kingdom, and I've only just now like really started like exploring the depths and like am trying to find like schematics and like playing around with like these new vehicle builds. I've been playing around with boats a lot in particular. I'm sure there's a lot of crazy stuff hidden down there, but like like there's so much hidden in Tears of the Kingdom, right? There's so much to find, so much more to find than Breath of the Wild. I feel like it, it's just, it's so weird to me that there are so many people out there trying to say that like Breath of the Wild is objectively better than Tears of the Kingdom or vice versa, because both games have a lot to offer. Both games offer like about 100 hours of content. I think Tears of the Kingdom has a lot more than that. Like both of these games have stellar combat systems, stellar mechanics, stellar enemy designs. But Tears of the Kingdom like does make some radical changes that improve on some of Breath of the Wild's like crippling flaws. For example, the boss fights are a lot better. That's something I haven't seen a lot of people talk about at all. In fact, I was told the exact opposite, that like the Tears of the Kingdom boss fights were disappointing. But in reality, they're like a genre high point. Like I can't begin to tell you how cool it was, like soaring through the sky, like shooting through the rings for Golgara, or like fighting that Queen Goma thing. That might be like my favorite Zelda boss of all time at this point. That was a crazy fight, or at least it was with my build. I was getting wrecked, but like it was like an incredible experience playing through both of these games. And like coming back to Breath of the Wild immediately after Tears of the Kingdom, like I find myself like really appreciating what this game does differently. Right, it has this more like lonely, isolated feel to it. Like, thunderstorms are more common. Like you have like all of these things. You have this like it just feels like a completely different experience in a lot of ways. Guardians are running around all the time. Like I think people forget, like if all you've been doing is playing like your 100% file of Breath of the Wild, like how difficult it is to like fight Guardians early on. Now it's possible to beat them like right away if you like know the shield fairy trick, but like I actually haven't been able to do it. Like it's been so long since I played, I kind of lost the skill. Like there was a time where I could like do it every single time, like almost every single time, and I had like the armor to take the hit if I missed. But like, doing it like with no armor, with like a terrible shield, like right at the beginning of the game, it's harder than like the speedrunners make it look, right? Right, like that was actually the first thing I did when I booted up my new when I got off the plateau in Breath of the Wild. Is that like I actually did go to the castle. I was trying to see like if I could get better weapons like early. Right, that was kind of my goal early on, was to get the better weapons early. But like you find out very quickly that like it's very hard to do. The game is so balanced in that regard. Like people who like try to trivialize this game by saying that like you can just go to the final boss really don't understand like how enjoyable it is to explore the world, get better armor and equipment, and become more powerful. Unlock all these crazy abilities, unlock everything in these games. Like, get to see everything the game has to offer. Like, there's more to do in Breath of the Wild than simply, and Tears of the Kingdom, than simply beating it, right? And I feel like a lot of people are, to this day, really undervaluing the value of these games, especially when it comes to Breath of the Wild. It's shocking that this game is, 6 years old now, and still surprising me in this fashion. This is my first master mode run. I'm not sure if I'll ever play it again. I feel like when I play the game again, it'll be like from the base mode, and I just don't know if like replaying this game from the start is really like to my preference or not, because I've spent so much time like trying to max out my best profile. It just seems weird like going back from the start. But I'm having a good time doing it this time, so maybe I'll do it. Maybe I'll do it. I I feel as if like playing these games, you really it's one of those things where like I haven't played Breath of the Wild in a long time. All right. I played it like religiously when it first came out. For a solid month, I was doing nothing but coming home and playing this game. I 100%ed it. I did everything in it. I came away thinking it was the best game ever made, and eventually, like it became one of my favorite Zelda games. It's something I have been talking about for a long time. But like when you're not actively playing a game, when you're like playing other games that you enjoy, when like you see people try to like downplay the game, and you defend it, you start wondering if like maybe the game isn't as good as I remember, or maybe I'm just being a fanboy or whatever. But like coming back to it, I can tell you with 100% certainty that is not true. Like Breath of the Wild absolutely holds up. Tears of the Kingdom was a phenomenal experience when I first played it back in May, right? Even now, whenever I boot the game in, I just get excited and like, and all the things I still have left to do and all the things to find. Like Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild really are the best games ever made. And I really don't really resent the fact that we're not allowed to like really talk about it. Like all I ever see these days is people trying to downplay these games or make excuses for their popularity or try to negatively compare them to other games. When in reality, let's just accept the fact that these are great games and that a lot of people love them. Like these games are spectacular, and I am tired of game journalists, YouTubers, and shills pretending they are not.